Hey guys, today we're going to talk about everything you need to know to write a great thesis. So, a thesis statement is one sentence that tells your readers the main points your paper covers as well as what order they're going to appear. Essentially, it's your entire paper squeezed into one sentence that comes at the end of your introduction. So there's some components that every thesis statement needs. Three main components. The first one is your topic. This is what your paper is going to be about. Your stance. This is where you stand on the issue. Is it something that you want to educate people on? Is it something that you agree with? Something that you disagree with? And then the last thing is a roadmap. This is going to be where your paper is going to take your reader. So if your thesis has all three of these components, by the time your reader gets to your thesis and reads it, they will know exactly what they're in for and where they're heading in your paper. So here's an example thesis. The Hate You Give should be required reading for all high school students because of Angie Thomas's compelling storytelling, because of the novel's important contributions to the ongoing conversations of racism and police brutality in America, and for the book's celebration of Black culture. So right off the bat, you can tell that the topic of this paper is the novel The Hate You Give. We can see that the author of this thesis statement, how they feel about it. They say that it should be required reading for all high school students. So that's their stance. And then they have a roadmap here. And it lists the three reasons why they are explaining their stance. The compelling storytelling, the novel's important contributions to the ongoing conversations of racism and police brutality, and then lastly, the book's celebration of Black culture, right? So if I read this thesis statement, I would know, okay, the first body section is going to be about storytelling, the second body section is going to be about these ongoing conversations, and the last body section is going to be about the book's celebration of Black culture. So this is a great thesis that points readers in the direction that the paper is going to go. Okay, so let's clear up some questions that people often have about thesis statements. This first one, does every paper need a thesis statement? Yes, every academic essay needs some kind of thesis statement. Where do I put my thesis? Put it in your introduction. It doesn't necessarily have to be the exact last sentence of your introduction, but usually that's where most writers put it, and that's where it makes the most sense. Can it be longer than one sentence? Nope, absolutely not. A thesis statement is only one sentence. It is sometimes a long sentence, and it's usually a compound sentence, but it's still just one sentence. And lastly, can I rewrite it if I change my mind? Absolutely, yes. It is so much easier to rewrite a thesis statement than it is to rewrite an essay. So if you get to the end of your essay that you've written and you're like, it kind of goes in a different direction than I thought it was going to go when I originally wrote my thesis statement. Go back and rewrite your thesis statement to be a working roadmap for the essay that you actually wrote. So for the essays that you're going to write in here, you will be turning in thesis statements before you turn in your essay. If you submit your final draft of your essay and you have a totally different thesis statement, that's perfectly fine as long as it matches the paper that you just turned in. So a thesis statement should be disputable, it should be focused, and it should be relevant to the topic that you're covering in your paper. And I'm going to give you some things that you can do to make sure that your thesis statement is all of these things. So first of all, I want your thesis to answer the how or why of your topic. So for example, in the thesis statement that we looked at a minute ago, why does that thesis statement say that The Hate You Give should be required reading? Well, for the three steps in the roadmap, the compelling storytelling, celebration of Black culture, and ongoing conversation. It also provides the logic for your paper, and it will also cover the entire paper. If you have 5 main stops on your roadmap, then all 5 of those stops will be in your thesis statement. Don't feel like you're just going to include some and then surprise your reader with the rest. You want all of your paper in your thesis statement. There are some things you want to avoid in your thesis statement. Personal pronouns, things like I, you, we. The statement that we looked at earlier, instead of saying, I believe the hate you give should be required reading, the author just wrote, the hate you give should be required reading. Those types of sentences are much stronger. They work better in academic essays, and they're written in third person. You always want to keep your academic essays in third person. You want to avoid extreme qualifiers. So everything, always, never, right? You should never go swimming in the lake, right? Never and always are extreme statements, and usually they're not true all of the time. You want to avoid vague formulations like some, kind of, what. You don't want to say the hate you give maybe should be required reading, because that doesn't make your thesis statement as strong as it could be. And then obvious exaggerations, things like life-saving, best of the best, etc. So if I were writing a paper on, tips and tricks to improve your studying, I wouldn't say that these are life-saving studying habits. Now, if I'm talking about a new cancer drug, maybe I would say that it was life-saving, but avoid obvious exaggerations. And then there's some things that your thesis should have. It should have some sources of information if it's important to your essay, things like studies reveal or research shows. Realistic views. Many people could benefit from the following study habits. Characteristics, things like primarily, frequently, or often. It should have clear explanations, things like you should have to read this because. It should have relationships, things like how, plastic in the ocean impacts global temperatures, as well as active verbs, things like demonstrate, illustrate, identify, and present. So here's a thesis checklist. Once you have written your thesis, you can kind of go down this list and make sure it has all of the elements that you will need. So could somebody disagree with it? If your thesis statement says something like, nurses work hard, right? Most people aren't going to disagree with that statement. But if it says something along the lines of nurses tend to work more hours than your average, doctor or something, that might be something that they're like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. Let me hear your research. Does it include your topic, stance, and roadmap? Is your standpoint clear and precise? And does it tell everything your paper will cover in brief? So as long as you've done these things, your thesis should be ready to go and the great backbone for your essay.